Hello and welcome to this episode of Wise Human. Today I have with me Kat. She is a shamanic practitioner and she facilitates plant medicine ceremonies. Hello and welcome, Kat.
Thank you for having me, Nicole. Good to be here.
Yay, we've been trying to make this happen for a while. I'm so happy we're finally here.
Me too. Stars aligned.
Yes, yes, all in perfect timing. So I want to go back to the beginning of when I first reached out to you and I asked you kind of what you did, and then I asked how you got into this path. What started that? Are you open to sharing that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because it's a very common story that what started it was tremendous pain and suffering, the dark night of the soul, as it were. I was in a place, this was about 20 years ago. So I was in a place of being a functional alcoholic, bulimia, diagnosed bipolar, attempted suicide, like just like lost and really hurting and sort of cast aside by the Western world as being like, you have a broken brain, you need to take this medicine, good luck, basically. And, that's really all I knew to be true. And then I was dating a boy who said, you want to go to the Amazon and try ayahuasca. And this is a long time ago before she was like the it thing. And I had no idea what that was, but everything in me lit up. It's like, yeah, I want that. And the first experience I had with ayahuasca was basically her reflecting to me, sweetheart, you're not broken. You can totally be happy. You've got a healing journey ahead of you, but please don't write this story that, you're a lost cause. There's no such thing. And that was completely life changing. And so I found, in some ways through shamanism and ayahuasca, a path to healing. But about 2 years into it, I was like, can a white girl from Montana learn to do this, like to actually help others? And that sort of set me off on the journey to, always working on my own healing, right? That never ends. But then learning how to work with ayahuasca in the capacity of being a server. So, but it all started 20 years ago because I was lost and in a tremendous amount of pain.
Mm, yeah. How amazing that it came to you in that time when, like you said, it wasn't a common thing. Like now, I think most people have heard of or, whisperings of ayahuasca and plant medicine. But back then, to have that fully aligned for you is definitely part of your path, I would say.
For sure. I was definitely the crazy one in my group of friends from LA of like, why are you going to the jungle? Drinking some psychotropic plant brew. It's kind of mind blowing in a good way how much she has permeated, the Western culture. And even as you said, people, not everyone who sat with her, most people have heard of her by now. And I didn't ever see that coming, but I'm very happy that's the reality.
Can you share a little bit? You said in those first 2 years, it was primarily your healing before you decided that you wanted to see if you could be a practitioner. Can you share a little bit about what was going on? You said you were struggling with bulimia and alcoholism, and you said something else, bipolar as
Bipolar.
well. Yeah,
Yeah.
can you like kind of dive in a little bit? I'm curious what your process was, where you were at, like before you went to the jungle, when you came back from the jungle, and then those following 2 years.
Well, I went back and forth to the jungle a lot, just putting, for me anyway, the relationship with ayahuasca in particular was just the place where I felt like I could do this work. And the work I would describe as, first and foremost, just confronting trauma, the things in my past that had happened that I sort of stored away unconsciously, the way and learning how the body stores trauma and working in different somatic ways, of course, outside of ceremony, to just support myself in the process of healing. And ayahuasca in particular, she likes to remove these obstacles, get energy moving that has been stagnant. So that also, of course, involves shadow work of like, confronting for me, the programming around self-hatred, the foundation of not loving myself was, of course, like, the space from which a lot of the destructive behaviors came from, which is easy to talk about, right? And really impossible to talk about in the way that this gets healed, because it doesn't happen with the mind, right? It has to happen experientially. And so really it was a lot of ceremonies of crying and purging and just finally giving myself the permission to feel everything and to confront the programming and how that felt, all so that I could continue to peel back layers to get to what I think is our essence, which is like, of course I love myself. Of, you know, that innocence that had been tainted, that all of us go through because the world is what it is. So those 2 years, 2.5 years actually, of kind of going back and forth to the jungle involved really deep medicine work with my shaman in the jungle. And really I was on my own with the integration because that wasn't a thing then. There was nobody working as a psychedelic integration therapist. I had a Jungian therapist that didn't have experience with the medicine, but understood this subconscious work that I was doing and could help me interpret dreams and like things like that. That was incredibly supportive. But I was just obsessed with my own personal healing then, because I got a taste of the fact that it was possible. And so that's what those 2.5 years was kind of filled with, is ceremony work and the aftermath and dream work and all of that to unravel that trauma.
Was there any one pivotal moment, or was it a series of moments?
Kind of both. Series of moments, but I remember one moment early on in ceremony where I was noticing that every time the shaman went to someone and performed like some sort of healing, helped pull out energy, it would fly across the room and hit me, and I would purge. And I'm like, why am I being abused in this way? What is happening? And ayahuasca, she speaks to me, you know, and she was like, well, this is what you do in your everyday life. You feel responsible for other people's suffering. So you take it in, and it's not your fault. You're doing it unconsciously. But it was this major aha moment of like, yeah, I do. I take on everybody's suffering around me because I feel like that's what love looks like. And that was a pivotal moment of realizing that needs to change. I need to have compassion, but not the responsibility of taking in other people's pain. And I think I mentioned that because I think a lot of us do that. If we grow up in environments where that was part of our safety, that is it's not an uncommon thing. But oh, I was so grateful to get that message because I had no idea up until that. And she showed it to me experientially and got me to acknowledge it. And so I could do something about it.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and you received that message, because sometimes I think messages will come through and we don't fully understand why or what it means, or misinterpret it.
Well, it was so painful to have that happen. And I think that's one of the ways plant medicines are so effective, is they're intense and amplified. So we kind of get the message because it's like, wait a second, this is hard, this is painful. What's this about? And it as soon as I acknowledged it, it stopped happening. She's like, there you go. You got the message. Now don't do this in your everyday life. Learn how to have that spaciousness and protection. And so that's why I love those spaces, is sometimes I need to be kind of smacked upside the head. You know, it needs to be a big neon sign or I don't always get the message.
Hmm. Yeah, what a beautiful representation of life in general. Like, it happens and it happens and it will happen again, whatever that thing is, until you acknowledge it, and then it goes away.
Yeah,
Once you acknowledge and make that shift.
the universe loves us so much. It's going to make sure we get the message. But one of my things that I love to work with myself and other people with the medicine is like, it doesn't have to become like the big neon sign that I just mentioned. If we're in tune, if we're listening, we can learn in a much more gentle way. And
Yes, I'm like grinning over here because I get that completely. And oh gosh, I've gone through phases where I'm like, get slapped upside the head because I'm not listening. And then in phases where you hear just a little whisper and you're tuned in and you trust it and you listen, and it's so much more effortless and beautiful. I mean, not maybe not necessarily beautiful, because there's beauty in all of it, but so much more effortless and soothing to go that route.
absolutely. And yeah, I think it's just more fun to learn in ways that are gentle, where we hear the whispers and don't need the intense reflection. But I love that the universe does love us enough that if it has to turn up the volume, it will, because I think that's why we're here, is to learn and to grow and to become more conscious. So it's going to happen one way or another, but learning to hear those whispers, I have more fun with the journey of life for having that piece of the puzzle. Not that I do it perfectly by any means.
So how was integration with your therapist? I mean, I think that's amazing that you had a therapist and
Yeah,
that worked. I mean, Jungian is shadow side, so that was along the same realm of plant medicine.
exactly. And as a Jungian therapist, he understood the archetypes that were coming through. And so it was fine that he didn't know what it felt like to work with ayahuasca. The language of the subconscious is really what I think most of the plants reflect. It is not the conscious mind. So I was really lucky to have him, because it's very confusing to work with these medicines and have your entire worldview kind of turned upside down. And back then, being the only person I knew of that was doing this work regularly, it was a little bit, feeling like I was crazy and I couldn't relate to a lot of it. So without that therapist, I would have been a much harder road in the integration, which is why, one of my, I would even say it's probably my number one passion now, is helping people in integration, because the ceremonies, or even the spiritual experience that we have, is magical, but it's what we do with it, right, in the aftermath, that matters. And a lot of times that requires support, is somebody that can help us connect the dots and come honor the intuition that's coming forth around how to embody it, how to ground it in the step-by-step process. So yeah, it's hard to do this work alone, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always life is always easier with a guide, especially somebody who's been there before, who has the skills and tools that you've yet to develop.
Absolutely. We're supposed to be in this together, not be climbing the mountain all by ourselves. Yeah.
But the world has gotten so like independent, individual, and I just see so much more suffering because of it. Like we are communal beings. We are supposed to be in contact with each other in like that tribal sense of just really, doing everything together, really, like raising our kids together and building our houses together, our homes, our businesses, like just helping each other out. And we've become so disconnected from that.
Well, it shows, doesn't it? Like the core suffering that I witness in our Western world, I think is a result of that disconnection, the isolation, the loneliness, the perfectionism of feeling like we have to do it all. And I think most notably is the disconnection from nature, from our home and our bodies, not just each other, but like all of the elemental things that occur in nature that are there to support us, that most of us don't have a relationship with, because we're so busy and we're just like, out in the corporate world and doing the things. And yeah, that I spending so much time in indigenous cultures, that's what I have seen, is like they haven't forgotten the relationship to each other and to the earth. And so they might not have as many materialistic things, but they're a lot happier and a lot healthier for that. So we got a lot to learn about coming full circle and coming back together in that regard.
Hmm. That's something I really love about third world countries. I feel like they have such a greater sense of community. And
Yeah.
coming back to the States after being in those places, I'm just like, oh, we have it so wrong. So many pieces. We have things right too, but so many pieces we've kind of forgotten about in the chasing of external validation and gain.
Yeah. Right. Which is why we see so many people who are crazy successful and abundant and miserable, because it's not
Hmm.
about that, to create that true sense of, not that you can't be abundant and happy too, but the chasing that you mentioned, it's not the recipe for happiness.
Yeah, and then you never like no matter where you get, you always want more. You're chasing the next thing and we forget to stop and pause and realize we are where our past selves wanted to be. Like we've done it, like let's enjoy this moment before we go on to the next.
One of the biggest things that ayahuasca works with me a lot on is like, before you go on to the next intention, can we celebrate all the progress? Look at all that you have. Look at how far you've come. It always feels so good to take that time and like just kind of look behind us of, wow, what a journey. And you're right, the past self has what it wants now. And to celebrate that is so important. Otherwise, it just becomes chasing, chasing, chasing. Yeah.
So you come back after this, or after like 2.5 years of really taking a deep dive personally. I'm curious actually before we move on, how was it coming back to the States and like being around your friends and this community and really what you knew your whole life until that point, having gone and had this completely eye-opening, expansive experience to come back to where you were before? What was that like?
Incredibly difficult because I lived in LA, you know, belly of the beast in
Just
some
like
ways.
the pinnacle, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember coming back the second time and I got a cab back to my apartment and we passed a billboard for a strip club and I just lost it. I went into like 3 days of crying and depression because it to me just reflected the reality of the world and the contrast of what I was experiencing in the jungle with the medicine, with the indigenous people I was working with the other Westerners that came together as a group, just so supportive and loving. And then to come back into LA and all that darkness, it was really, really tough. And again, no context for integration. There was no wisdom around, even somebody telling me it's going to be hard, that contrast, right? I didn't even know to expect it. So, yeah. And then, of course, like any spiritual journey, when we start to evolve in that way, relationships had to change. My job, actually, everything had to change, Nicole. Like, everything was not, everything in my life at that point was not in alignment with who I really was. So that's bloody difficult. Even though it's for the better, it's still so hard to let go of these things. So yeah, that process was. I like one of my spiritual teachers is Adyashanti, and he describes that awakening process as being the most destructive experience we will ever go through because it's dismantling everything. It's not really gaining wisdom. It's unprogramming, unlearning the stuff that was creating the suffering. Of course, that means a lot of things had to change as a result. So, yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for every single part of it, but that was really, really challenging.
How did you navigate that?
Just intuitively, really. And it wasn't very graceful. I mean, diagnosed bipolar, I'm obviously expressive with emotions. And I would probably still be diagnosed bipolar if I was completely transparent with a therapist. I think the difference is that as I started working with ayahuasca, she taught me to just accept and work with the intensity of my emotions, that it's a gift. But it took me a while to get to a place where I was grounded in my own body enough that my emotions didn't spin me out. So, that first couple of years was a roller coaster for sure. But it started becoming less dramatic in the highs and lows because as I was doing the integration and learning to connect with my body, to have self-care, which I had none of, to nurture myself, to listen, to slow down, to work with my nervous system, like all of these things that I wish we taught in school that are so fundamental to our happiness and well-being. I had to learn in the jungle, basically, and then come back to the concrete jungle and apply them. But how perfect, right? Because if I figured if I could learn to do it there, I could do it anywhere, which is true. But yeah, it was. It's still a roller coaster. But in those early days, I was very much intuitively finding my way because there weren't a lot of people that were paving the way in that regard at that time.
At what point did you end up finding community that was walking the same path?
So I just, it literally took me 2 years to wonder, is there anybody in the States doing this work? Like, is it starting to permeate mass consciousness? And so I just started sitting in different circles all around the world, really. And I found a tribe for a bit and then was like, no, that's not quite it. And as I like to say, I kissed some frogs before I found my teacher. And I knew immediately when I sat in this man's energy of like, that I want to learn from him, which he initially said, no, you're a bimbo. I'm not taking you on. I'm like, okay, well, it's not the first guy to misjudge me. But honestly, I was kind of relieved at first because I could feel the responsibility of learning something like this. But then a handful of months, he called me back and said, you know what, the medicine keeps saying your name. I'd like to work with you. And it was in accepting that offer of apprenticing that I found the first plant medicine community that I ended up connecting with. It's evolved since then, but I wasn't alone anymore. And that was a tremendous gift.
What did that apprentice process look like?
Well, what he said to me before I accepted it is he said minimum of 7 years. Consider this it's the same as going to med school. Basically, you're going to learn, you're going to intern, you're going to sit next to me in hundreds and hundreds of ceremonies. He said that it needs to be your number one priority. At the time I was married and I had a stepson. And he's like, this goes above your family. It goes above everything else because it's life and death that you're learning here. And you have to be all in. I'm not taking a half-ass sort of apprenticeship, which scared me. And so I'm like, I need a couple ceremonies. I need to sit with this. And I kept going back and forth, the yes, no, yes, no. But then it occurred to me of like, I don't know what else I would do because there was nothing else that I loved with every ounce of my being outside of this work. And so I was like, well, okay, I'll do it. Minimum of 7 years. It ended up being, well, all told, about a 10-year apprenticeship before I poured a single cup of medicine. And it's different for everybody, right? It's like such a uniquely personal path, but he wasn't kidding about the depth of commitment, sacrifice, all of that was and is required.
Wow. Do you drink every ceremony that you facilitate?
I do. And that's kind of unique to working with ayahuasca is we want it to be her show. And so we do that by imbibing with her. Everyone's different too in terms of the people that work with her, how much they drink. I like to drink a significant amount of medicine because the cat show is interesting. The ayahuasca show is magical, And my teacher was really intense and hard on me. He would push me to my very limit, which I needed. I needed to find that strength inside of me to have a lot of medicine and be of service. So yeah, so I've drank thousands of times. I have no idea how many times at this point, but a lot of medicine.
Sounds like your training process was very in depth, and I'm sure a bunch of things came up. What is like one of the most profound experiences you had in your training?
Well, learning to deal with the depths of darkness and suffering. I would say my relationship with suffering as a whole. Because if you do this work, and I think this is probably true for anybody that's of service, whether it's a doctor, a therapist, a shamanic guide, etc. If you don't have a relationship with suffering that's based on trust, that you know that we suffer for a reason, that you trust that it's bringing us to somewhere, doing this work can be devastatingly dark. But so I had to learn to trust my own suffering. And then the medicine extended that out of like, isn't it a blessing to suffer? Which, that's a big thing to sit with. Of like, okay, yeah. I mean, and I learned to really, it's almost like I have a relationship with suffering itself as a personified entity. I bow to that energy. I'm there to help mitigate the suffering for myself and others, but I know that it's happening for a very divine reason. And before I cracked that code, it was just really painful to witness what people go through. I also needed to and continue work on this the awareness that I'm not responsible for fixing anybody's suffering. You know, I look at all of us kind of as space holders, as we're champions for helping people go from hell to heaven. But I'm not doing the work for them. The medicines don't do it for us either. We each have to do it. But as soon as I started seeing suffering as a teacher rather than something that tortures us, this work got a lot easier, a lot more fun.
Does every ceremony get pretty dark?
Yes. Yeah. Ayahuasca in particular, I call her the medicine of duality, because one of the things she likes to teach us is if you can walk through hell with a smile on your face, everything is heaven.
Mm.
Which again, really easy to say. And then she has this way of creating that perfect recipe for whatever our version of hell is, and going, here, let's find a smile. Can you love this? Can you trust this? And but of course, it's so empowering when we're able to dig deep and find that, because, you know, I'm not reactionary in the world anymore when little things happen, because I'm like, are you kidding? You know, the depth to which I've had to sit in what I would call hell and to find that light. There's so many times I sat with her in the beginning where I'd be like, ayahuasca, where is the light? Where is the light? And she's like, honey, be it. You have it, shine it, stop looking for it externally, like find it within you. And I'm grateful for that, but damn, like that's not always readily available.
How did you find that light?
Practice, you know. Ooh, thunder and lightning.
Look at that.
uh, and actually that's a great reference, is looking to nature for an example of all of this. You know, that's what I've learned on the shamanic path, is that she's showing us everything we need to know out there. We just have to connect. So the sun always rises. So one of the things I learned to really integrate is the darkness likes to tell us it's permanent, and it's never, ever true. Energy is always in motion. So one of the ways that we really create more suffering for ourselves is thinking, I am permanently in this horrible state, whatever it is. This is never getting better. And the irony is that I like to point out is, like, when we're really happy and really, really joyful, we're scared to go all in with it because we know it's temporary. Of like, oh, but if I'm too excited, it's going to be taken away. So she's like, wait a second, you think the darkness is permanent and the light is temporary. Neither are true. They're both just passing through and contrast of each other. So once I started, you know, basically cracking the code of the darkness and not believing the lies that it's my fault that something was happening, that it's permanent, and being able to ride the wave, to be with it. And then you learn lots of tools, right, on the shamanic path, of things that you can do to support yourself, so that you don't have to white knuckle it and just hope that it passes. So all of that step by step, and I'm still a student of this, very much so, but it helps a little bit. Every little bit of learning is a little less suffering when the darkness comes in.
It's a lifelong journey.
Absolutely. Lifetimes long for me. I know
True.
I'm going to be at this a long time. Yeah.
Can you share some of the tools that you've discovered through your process of sitting in ceremony?
Absolutely. I'll share the ones that are powerful and deceptively simple. My favorite, it is the one I tell people all the time, do not underestimate the power of this, is when any darkness comes in ceremony, in life, smile. Put a big old smile, open heart of like, all right, let's do this. You know, so if people are in ceremony with me and the wave of darkness comes in, the worst thing that we can do is the thing that we often do, which is kind of contract into fetal and just like, oh no, not this, and start telling ourselves just that it's not what I want. And oh God, I can't wait for this to be over. So I'm like, do the opposite, lean into it. It's the opposite of what we do in the world when something's painful, emotionally or physically, is go into it. My totem for this is the buffalo, because when the storm comes for a buffalo, they run into it, right? They're like, okay, I'm not going to get through this by avoiding it. I'm going into it. So I will often call in the energy of the buffalo of like, all right, here comes my storm. Help me be courageous to lean in. So a big smile and an open heart and a straight spine so the energy can move through me. And what I say to myself is, I got this. I got this. I say yes to this, and that acceptance of it takes away so much of the suffering, because the suffering comes from conflict, fighting with the intensity. The intensity might not change, right? But the way I'm relating to it, I have control over. I can say, I say yes to this. So it's not really magic, it's mindset. It's all the things that we can do internally to work with what's happening rather than resist it.
So everybody I know, I've not sat with Aya, but everybody I know who has told me that they faced their own mortality. Is that pretty common?
Well, it's in her name. So the word ayahuasca means vine of the soul or vine of the dead. In Quechua, soul and dead is the same, because when you die, you become your soul, right? So
Hmm.
yes, she loves a good old fashioned ego death, which really isn't a death. It's just a opportunity for a part of our consciousness that isn't the ego to come online and have the steering wheel, right? But it feels like a death. So yeah, she loves to kind of show us that our relationship with death is, of course, directly related to our relationship with life. And that if we're afraid of death and we don't trust it, we're not all in with living either. So that's one of her favorite go-tos.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Are we really all in with living? I would say most of us are not.
Not if we are ignoring or fearing our inevitable transition. Yeah. And it's not something that we talk about very often unless we have to, right? But in ayahuasca circles, we talk about it all the time because we have to, because she's bringing it front and center. And that's one of the biggest ways that she is a healer, an expander of consciousness, because that's the elephant in the room that we often don't want to acknowledge.
Yeah, and it's just like you were saying with the darkness, like welcoming it and going into it versus trying to run from it. Like the things that we don't talk about, the things we try to run from just become bigger and bigger and scarier and scarier. So, yeah, that should be a conversation we're having whether we're sitting in ceremony or not.
I completely agree. I actually got certified last year as a death doula because I love that space of not just the transitioning because it's so sacred, but the acknowledgement of what death is and leaning into it, not waiting for it to be knocking on our door or in a plant medicine ceremony, but like to have that be more of what we acknowledge and support each other with, because we're all going to do it. Can't outrun it.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for people that do have a fear around death? How to kind of make friends with it or make peace with it?
Yeah, well, it's exactly what we're doing right now is to first talk about it. I have a lot of like journal prompts for people who are befriending the energy of death just to work with. Well, okay, what do I know? What evidence do I have, of what I think happens, especially if what we think happens is negative. Like, do you have evidence of that? Probably not, right? And just to kind of take the time to explore what is our experience with energy or consciousness outside of a body. That's why psychedelics are so great for this, is because they take us in an expanded state, but it's not the only way by any means. I have some clients that have dealt with really intense fears of death, and I will suggest go volunteer in hospice, go be with someone and look at it, be in the presence of that. It's how I kind of demystified my fear of it, is being a hospice volunteer in the early days and realizing it's beautiful and natural. And one of the things I always encourage us to be aware of when we're witnessing death in any form, animal, a friend, a family member, is to also look at what is being born. In our culture, we're so obsessed with what is dying. The body is failing. Uh-huh. But what else is happening? And when you ask somebody who's dying that and they have the ability to communicate, you will always hear like, well, there's somebody behind you. Like I can see my dead husband. Like that there's something being born if we put our awareness there, and it doesn't in any way dismiss the intensity of the death itself, but I'd like us to be more in balance of the death and the rebirth. What I like the expression, as the body gets weaker, the spirit gets stronger, because I find that to be so true, and the thunder is agreeing with me. Thank you. Yeah. And so just to allow that, to put our awareness there, it's so empowering.
Like, completely side note, it was just storming here, like thundering and lightning super intensely right before I started. It's still sprinkling a little. So I just find that very interesting that we're in different parts of the country, but we're in the same weather right now.
Well, the universe is clearly enjoying the conversation then. It's like
I
wanting
think
to be in
so.
on this. Yeah, that feels good.
We're supported.
Absolutely.
So I know that you work with other plant medicines as well. Can you share about a few of those?
Absolutely. So, in addition to being trained with ayahuasca, I'm also trained to work with wachuma, also known as San Pedro. This is cactus medicine that is classified as an empathogen, which is what MDMA is, medicines like that. So, ironically, it's not really very psychedelic. I mean, working with wachuma, you can sort of see the veil lift and see things more as it really is, but it's not like a traditional psychedelic. It's heart medicine. So Wachuma is considered the divine masculine, where ayahuasca is very feminine. And so I love getting to work with both of these medicines in the same sort of context of a week-long retreat, because they're really imbalanced. Ayahuasca you work with at night, Wachuma you work with during the day. Ayahuasca is all about shadow work and digging deep into our psyches. Wachuma comes and opens the heart and helps work with the integration of the body. So they're my two main psychotropic medicines that I work with. And then I also do something called master plant diets, which is basically a marriage between a human and a plant spirit for a period of time. And there are hundreds and hundreds of master plants. Most of them are not psychotropic, like rose and sage, blue lotus, but she is kind of psychotropic. There's many, many master plants that I've done diets with and that I hold diets for other people, because, nature's got a lot to teach us, whether it's altered experiences or not. So that's kind of the core of my work, basically helping humans and plants be in relationship.
And plant diets, what can you explain a little bit of that? It's integrating and receiving the teachings from that plant. Is it specifically just dieting that one plant? I actually had somebody on the show a few episodes ago, and she talked about dieting plants as well. She does that. But I'm curious if you could expound on that for people listening to this show.
Absolutely. Yeah. So basically, when you diet a plant, you're going to follow a pretty strict protocol of what you're eating. The idea being that we consume really bland, like just clean foods. So we don't want spice. We don't want, fried foods. We don't want red meat, anything dense, because the goal is to feed our bodies, but not our taste buds. We're not distracting ourselves, and to remove some of the obstacles that our typical Western diet creates in terms of connecting with spirit. So heavy, heavy processed foods and super salty foods and all of that may taste good, but it can be heavy and dulling on our consciousness. So we cut all that out. We're just eating really clean, bland foods. Ideally, as minimal media as possible, just considering what our jobs are and whatnot, because we want to spend the spare time that we have in our busy lives working with our plant, usually through a tea. Almost all the plants we're going to drink as a tea, at least at the beginning and the end of our day. And that's why, I call it a relationship or a marriage, because I treat my plant that I'm dieting the way that I treat my partner. At the start of the day, I'll sit with my tea and be like, okay, this is what I'm excited about in my day. This is what's hard. This is what I'm working with. These are my questions for you. What have you got for me? What can I do for you? Now, and at night, it's like, here's how my day was, and here's how I'm feeling. And then I invite them into my dream space. The idea with the diet is that we're merging with the consciousness of the plant that has something we want to learn. So interestingly enough, I'm opening a diet tomorrow morning for myself with lavender, because it's my second go with her, because my nervous system is a work in progress. And she is incredibly good at calm, serene energy and presence. And so I'm going to her to learn more about that. So I like to joke, how in the tech world we say there's an app for that, whatever it is you're trying to do. For me, there's a plant for that. Whatever it is we want to learn or heal or experience, there are plants that embody that wisdom. And so what we typically do is match the plant with the intentions of the person. Yeah, it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that's kind of an ideal amount of time for a master plant portal, but some people do it for months and months. If it's something they really deeply want to learn. I dieted sage for a year because I needed to really learn self-protection. I didn't have any awareness of it. But that's kind of the heart of a diet, is to merge with the wisdom of a plant that has something you want.
How do you know when to end the diet? When do you know that you've merged with the medicine?
That's a great question. It's usually just sort of an intuitive, like, yeah, I think I'm nearing the end. Usually unless you're trained in doing this for yourself, it's usually held by a guide. And sometimes that comes through the person that's holding the diet of like, I think we're nearing the end. And sometimes it happens because our life requires it. You might have a wedding you're going to, and you're not going to be salt and alcohol free, and it's okay, because the thing is, if we go 2 weeks with a plant, and we know we want to go deeper later, we can. Like, we don't have to do it all at once. So it can happen in chapters. So we either follow the flow of our lives or our intuition, or both.
And do you find that when you're dieting a plant that you get the wisdom in that period of time that you're dieting it, or does more wisdom come through after?
For sure, it keeps coming. Because typically when we're trying to chase something, in any regard in the spiritual sense, it often sort of avoids. But when we're just sort of unexpectedly like allowing it in, that's when the magic often happens. So in the integration with a diet, it's the same for a plant medicine ceremony. It often will be driving down the road and be like, oh, that's what the bear and the tutu was symbolizing. I got it, like, we just make the connection sort of mysteriously, but we can't force it. So the integration is often where the magic, the insights, and all of that can come in.
How important is integration, and how does one go about integrating after any plant, receiving from any plant intelligence?
Part of that is easy to answer. It is the most important piece by far, because the ceremony or the diet, the experience, is going to bring things to the surface. It's what we do with it that matters. What we do, though, is it's personal. There's not a recipe for integration necessarily, but I can tell you what has to occur. We have to have a spiritual practice. We have to show up for ourselves, ideally every day, and check in with simple things like, how am I feeling? How am I doing right now? Because if we're not reflecting inward, it's much harder to get the insights, to have a foundation of self-care and inner connection. And we have to include the body. What I see a lot in integration right now is that we're doing it only with our beautiful minds. And it's an important tool. Our minds get to be a part of it. But if it stays here, doesn't do us a lot of good in terms of how it can transform the way we walk in the world. So somatic experiences, movement, embodiment has to be included, or it will remain, a lovely academic understanding, but without embodiment. I actually use embodiment as another word for integration, because it reminds us, like, we got to bring it all the way in.
And how does one do that? How do you embody the teachings?
Well, it's not often direct in that, like, okay, let's say I'm embodying more the awareness of serenity. I might discover that on the yoga mat just because I'm showing up each day and moving my body. I might discover it on a walk in nature. Like, just it involves a commitment to being connected to the body, but we don't necessarily know the secret sauce of how it's going to click. So, any commitment to being body connected and to listening to the wisdom of the body is in a way answering that question. But it's going to be a different recipe for everyone every time because it's so incredibly personal, and it's not done in the mental space. So it just kind of things click when we're working, when we're doing things to connect with something other than our minds. I think that's the key, is if we're just stuck here, it's not the right tool for healing. We gotta access our hearts and connect with our bodies, and things kind of magically come together then. But if we're not doing that, the clicks aren't going to happen because it doesn't happen from that mental space.
Yeah, you can only intellectualize so much. You have to feel it and embody it.
Exactly. The energy has to move, right? In order for things to be grounded in. And so however we can move energy is beautiful.
How important is it to have that self-care routine before sitting in ceremony?
Oh, geez, it's a make or break kind of situation. Because if we don't have some ritual of self-care, that's the first thing that ayahuasca in particular is going to reflect of, oh, you're coming for healing and the secrets of the universe. How on earth do you think you're going to attain that when you're treating yourself in any sort of destructive way? That is the secret of the universe right there, is that the way we treat ourselves is the way we treat each other. It's all within, without, right? There's no disconnection. And the only being that we're always connected to is ourselves. So if there isn't a commitment to, whew, this is quite the storm out there. Sorry if it's noisy. If there isn't a commitment to showing up for ourselves, that is where the medicines will continue to reflect, because that's the foundation by which everything else comes from.
A lot of people travel for ceremonies, like Central South America. How what are your thoughts on that and the integration process? Because I would imagine sitting in a ceremony in the middle of the jungle and then ending up at LAX is going to be quite shocking to the system.
Yes, and it's also very shocking to the system to try to do this kind of work in the concrete jungle. So, but it's kind of beautiful right now that any kind of scenario is available. So we can each feel into, wow, does it feel more expansive and supportive to get out of the context of my crazy Western life and go to the jungle, the home of the medicine, and do that? Or does it feel safer? And I use that word intentionally. It's all about safety to me. It might feel safer of like, I'm just going to go down the road and go to a local, like, maybe you live in Oregon where it's legal to work with psilocybin, or you're in the underground working with someone. If that feels safer, great, it's available. I mean, this work is kind of everywhere right now, which means that we have to be discerning around who we choose to guide us in this way, but we got lots and lots of choices. And I just support people in figuring out what feels safe and effective for them, and that's perfect. You're right. Committing to go to the jungle means it's going to be quite a contrast when you come home. But we can be prepared for that. I wasn't, but we can be prepared now and have things in place so that we're supported when we come back in case that's a bumpy road. Because it could be really, really challenging doing it in your backyard too. And the contrast from that, right? We're not going to avoid that necessarily.
Mhm. In your nearly 2 decades of being in the plant medicine world, have you seen facilitators with ill intent?
Sadly, way too often. And let me qualify that. I would say very rarely is it conscious ill intent. I have encountered black magic, like people using their powers to hurt people intentionally. That is pretty rare. Unintentional abuse, though, is very common, because I think right now what's happening is it's such an exciting world to be a part of that people are rushing the process of the apprenticing, of the training. The best analogy I can give is like if I watched a bunch of episodes of Grey's Anatomy, that doesn't give me authority to perform surgery on someone. But someone who sits a few times with a medicine like ayahuasca and then is like, I love this, I got this, I'm going to serve medicine, it's the same thing. Like if you haven't gone to hell and back many times, faced your shadow, really confronted these demons that will come out in the space when you're holding space, you're dangerous, even if you have the best intentions. I like the expressions that the road to hell was paved with good intentions. Is there are a lot of people that mean well and they really want to help, but they're not yet in the maturity and the capacity to hold the space required for someone else to go deep into their darkest corners of their psyche and feel safe in the care of the individual that's guiding them. So there's a lot of unintentional abuse happening because it's kind of the wild, wild west right now.
Yeah. If somebody is feeling called to do ayahuasca, to sit with ayahuasca, what would you recommend they look for in a facilitator?
Yeah. So some core questions is how long have they been working with the medicine? What did their training look like? And it's really, to me, important that there was training, that they learned this process from someone else. They don't have to follow a tradition perfectly. They can do it in their own way, but to have a tradition that has been the foundation from which they've done their own sort of modification. Because people that are self-taught are the ones that I feel like, not unequivocally, but that could be the kind that unintentionally cause harm because they didn't have someone who was further along the road taking their hand and saying, here's how we do it. So making sure that there was lots of training, that they've drank the medicine many, many times, not a few times in ceremony and decided that this was their path. Um, the person should know everything about what's in the brew, what they're serving, every touch point, where it comes from, because these medicines absorb energy all along the way. And so if they're buying things off the internet and like they don't know who grew them and cultivated them, or they don't have a brewmaster, I don't trust that. And whether or not the guide has the capacity to help with integration, the circle, the greater organization itself should have integration options available. That's becoming more popular, but it's still not the norm. Is I don't like the places that you go, you have these experiences, and they send you back out in the world and say good luck. To have integration in case you need it, you might not. But to make sure that there's preparation, that they're really, really discerning about asking medical history and mental health history, support, of course, in the ceremony itself and in the aftermath, that you've got a container that is held basically through the whole spectrum of the experience.
What would disqualify somebody from being able to sit with ayahuasca?
A history of seizures, a history of severe issues with their heart. And here's my best analogy. If you can't ride a wild roller coaster, don't drink ayahuasca, because the same kind of effects are going to come in. So if your body is too sensitive, your heart is too sensitive to go on a roller coaster at Disneyland, plant medicine isn't for you. And there's also, some contraindications with some pharmaceuticals, specifically SSRIs, MAOIs. So people that are on those medications need to taper off safely with their doctor for a period of time, have them out of their system. Usually most places we say 30 days before you can drink ayahuasca, because she is an MAOI. And so we don't want to flood anybody's system with serotonin. It is uncomfortable at best and deadly in rare cases. So those are the major prerequisites, at least in terms of like physical and mental. From there, I just feel into, are you really ready to go into the depths of your psyche? And that's just an intuitive hit, because most of us think that we want to be ready, but that's not always true. And so, the gatekeepers, those of us that kind of say yes or no to someone, that's what we're kind of trying to feel into, is that they're safe if it's a hard night. It might not be. Sometimes it's lollipops and rainbows, but we want to make sure there's like a feeling of readiness that is really hard to quantify.
So you speak with everybody who's going to sit in ceremony and make sure, or to the best of your ability, that they are at a place where they're going to be able to handle this. What does that look like? Is that like Like a one-on-one interview for a short period of time?
It starts with a questionnaire. So my company is called Plant Medicine People. So on plantmedicinepeople.com, if you want to participate, you fill out the questionnaire, which gives like the history. From there, as long as none of those prerequisites that I just mentioned are included, then yeah, then I have a Zoom call. And, it's just like, tell me why you want to do this. What are your intentions? What are you afraid of? Just like having a heart-to-heart conversation so I can feel into it. I will tell you that most people, I say resounding, yes, let's do this. Sometimes I'll say, hey, are you okay if we give you a small dose and we ease into this? We establish some trust because I might not be sure. There's a lot of people that come through that are super sensitive, which I think is a superpower, but I protect that by saying, you don't have to drink a full dose. Let's establish some trust and not go big or go home. I don't like that philosophy. So when I interview people, it's not just does it feel like a yes or a no? It's also like, how are we going to start in? Are you okay if it's gentle at first? If we kind of just test that sensitivity, and most people are totally fine with that. It's partly what helps them feel safe.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's great that you're doing this with such intention and integrity, because I imagine, and I'm curious to hear from your perspective, that some people leave much worse off.
Yeah, absolutely. Healing is tricky that way. It's not a straight line. We can't guarantee it. And medicines like ayahuasca, they kind of pop the top off in terms of our psyche, what we're dealing with. And sometimes it does get worse before it gets better. And so setting realistic expectations like that too. One of the dangers right now of the whole psychedelic movement is the idea that this is the next cure. Mushrooms cure addiction or depression or whatever. They don't. Just the same as pharmaceuticals never cured us of our human condition. Plant medicines don't either. They expand our consciousness. They give us more to work with. But when we expand, we don't just expand into yumminess and love and happiness. We can expand deeper into our darkness. And so that's why it's good to have support in the aftermath. Is that happens. It still happens to me. Every time I do another retreat, I don't know how I'm going to feel afterwards. But part of it is accepting that sometimes it's harder before it's easier. That's part of that relationship with suffering I was mentioning, is like, okay, sometimes we just got to work through some of the things that are painful in order to have a breakthrough. And that is just the process of healing and, the way of the world.
Hmm. Before I ask our final questions, because we're getting to time, is there anything else you feel to share or that people should know about plant medicine?
Just okay. So on the one hand, I'm giving warnings about, oh, it's not a cure, but it also, for me anyway, is a limitless space of possibility. Like anything is possible in that space. It's not guaranteed, but I have watched people heal stage 4 cancer and come through the other side. I've also watched people with stage 4 cancer make peace with death and die with a smile on their face. So it's not necessarily about getting what we want in that way, but there's always an opportunity just to surrender to what is coming and to say yes, to the journey of our life. So for people with a calling to this space, I can tell you it's going to be magical, even if it's not easy.
Most things in life are.
Yep.
What's the best advice you've ever been given?
Oh, my teacher used to say to me constantly, Kat, are you enjoying the ride? It's the only time you'll have this ride. And quite often I would be sitting there in misery. It's like, no, that simple reminder that that is always available. I could always go, well, here I am. I'm on this ride. I might as well have a blast with it. And I happen to love roller coasters. So that's a good metaphor of like, woohoo, on this crazy ride. As simple as that is, it's so powerful to remind ourselves of like, I can enjoy this. I do have that power, even if it's hard, because it is a conscious blessing to have whatever's happening in our field. So I love that. I used to have it written on my refrigerator. Enjoy the ride today, Kat. Come on, you can do it.
What do you wish more people knew about you?
That I still very much am the same girl that drank plant medicine the first time 20 years ago. That it's not that anything has drastically changed except for my capacity to love myself. And so, and I say that because I want everybody to have this awareness that we're not broken. There's nothing we have to fix. It's more the relationship with all of this complexity that we're talking about today, and that there's no state of consciousness where we don't deserve love, right as we are right now. There's nothing we have to change or fix or do. And that's the one thing that has drastically changed in these 20 years, is I'm like, I'm awesome right now. I deserve love. Why wouldn't I? Even in my darkest moments, which still happen a lot, right? It's not about avoiding that. It's about loving ourselves through that anyway. So I want that for everybody.
What's your current mantra or motto?
Nothing is as it seems. That is the current thing I say to myself a lot, because I read the headlines and I see the darkness happening in the world, and I sometimes fall prey to it of, oh my God, we're doomed. And then I remind myself, no, 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 that's not how duality works. It's darkest before the storm, or darkest before the light, and we're in the storm. And that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong or bad about this intensity. So I remind myself of that all the time. It's not as it seems. We're moving towards something so much more beautiful. It's just we're in a shadow time, and that's necessary. And it's not as the gloom and doom that the headlines would have us believe.
What is my last question? I always ask this question. Oh, if you could tell everybody in the world one thing, what would it be?
That death is safe, that where we are headed is completely and totally safe.
How do you know that?
I think we all do, down deep, because everyone and everything does it. So how can it not be? That it is literally as natural as being born to also die. So if it was safe to be born, and I mean safe not in the sense of, oh, it's easy, I mean safe in that we are held, we cannot be destroyed on an energetic level. And so I can't conceive of how it couldn't be, right? It doesn't make logical sense. That doesn't mean any of this is easy. It just means it's natural. And to me, that's the core of safety.
How can people connect with you?
I mentioned plantmedicinepeople.com is my website. I'm on Instagram in particular. That's as Plant Medicine People. That's my favorite social channel. And at Kat at plantmedicinepeople.com, you can reach out and email.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kat, for sitting with me today and sharing all of your wisdom and experience. I found a lot of it enlightening, and I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Thank you so much for having me and for guiding us into such beautiful spaces in this conversation. It was an honor.
If you enjoyed this episode or found value in it, I invite you to leave a 5-star review, or share with a friend. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.